Well, um, I have met a group of very entertaining folks here in the Czech Republic, and they're very quiet and unassuming, and they go by the name the Pilgrims, the
Okay.
Putnici in Czech. And they are dedicated to going around and releasing injured spirits, releasing some of the karma that the Bohemian people have collected since the 30 Years' War and so forth. And they're very unassuming, very quiet. But they did, back in March of 2009, a releasing of Edward Kelly's soul from the prison at Most.
Okay.
Now, that's the prison where Kelly died, and he died cursing the city of Most to the point that the city of Most no longer exists, and there's only a wall left of the castle now. It's all gone. But the energy of this curse was still bound up in the land, and it was still, according to these guys, keeping Kelly from evolving, from moving on with his afterlife.
Okay.
So they went out as a group, and they did their meditations and their automatic drawings and their chanting and singing and, their hoodoo, as we call it, the technical term.
Okay.
And they completely released Edward Kelly. And a month later to the day, I arrived in Prague for the first time and got hit over the head with the whole story of Kelly and Shakespeare and the Dark Lady and the whole thing. So I have no doubt that these guys were powerful enough magicians to release that Kelly energy so that it would be available for me to use in my book and available for these guys on the hill here to create their Edward Kelly Alchemical Museum. It's like that act of magic freed something up on a truly amazing level.
So that all the events that followed,
Yep.
you getting into the research of Edward Kelly, the museum opening, or just them deciding, oh, okay, let's open a museum now, that all
Yep.
became possible.
Yeah, but all flowed from it. Now, I had done a tremendous amount of research on Edward Kelly before I came to Prague for the first time in 2009. I was pretty much an authority even then, and at this point, I'm probably the authority. So, it's been quite a ride, and without that act of magic, all of this other stuff wouldn't have happened. Now, the curious thing is that in the angelic sessions, the angels predicted to Dee and Kelly that something would have to happen before their whole Enochian Ophanic system could actually be used.
Right.
And what would have to happen is that the people who had treated Dee and Kelly badly, particularly Kelly, would all apologize and praise his work. Okay? So a lot of the people at the Working in Most feel connected to Kelly in the time period, and it was definitely an apology and a releasing.
Right, okay.
And he's definitely about to be kind of world famous for who he really was, as opposed to all the legends and spooky stories.
Well, yeah, if you do this thing with the opening of the crypt,
Yep.
and let's say somebody like History Channel does grab it, that would be huge.
Yep. So if there's anybody listening to this that's a producer for any production company working for the History Channel, get in touch with Scott and he'll give me a buzz.
Yep, no, guaranteed.
First come, first serve.
Oh, the opening the crypt that has been open since the 1600s, who wouldn't jump on that? Especially
Yeah, that's
somebody
what I
like,
think.
Yeah, it's huge. You should definitely do that, and I think you'll probably end up doing it because it looks like it's got its own head of steam at this point.
Well, if Magister Kelly wants it to happen, I have no doubt now that it will happen.
Well, plus you're writing extensively now on Kelly, living in Kelly's tower.
Yep.
Just that alone, basically he could be whispering in your ear everything he wants you to write.
Well, yeah, I try to make sure that we don't have too much ghostly activity in my little apartment. I need to get some sleep, and it's hard to focus,
Well, you're definitely in the area for it. It's the old buildings that, retain energies of,
Oh,
history.
the staircase in the tower is carved from one piece of oak. In other words, the central pole and the spiral steps around it are all one piece of oak.
What? That must be a hugely thick tree.
Yes, they took a 500 or 600-year-old oak tree from up on Pechin Hill, the hill across the way, and hand carved it into a spiral staircase that's, I don't know, 60 feet tall, something like that.
Wow. I'm just...
It's a huge thing.
I used to be a woodworker. I did antique reproductions early 19th century, late 18th century. So that's blowing my mind right now. Tom, ask him a question while I recover.
I want to hear again connection to Jerusalem and some of the...
Well, very, very fascinating. For the last 1,000 years, there's been a sort of underground group of, I don't know, spiritual sages. The local name for them is the Brotherhood of the Circle. And they may or may not exist. They have surfaced a couple of times into history, but they seem to be the most plausible explanation for how Prague got the alignment it has. And basically, the idea was to take all the pagan sacred places and convert them to Christianity. And the pagan sacred places are all aligned to the winter solstice sunrise. Well, it turns out that the winter solstice sunrise from this particular vantage point in Central Europe is directly toward Jerusalem. So in the 11th century, they started building these little round churches with the asp or the nave of the church pointing directly at Jerusalem. And when you line up a few of these, they're pointing at the dome of the, not the Dome of the Rock, but the Golgotha, the place of the crucifixion, the little Anastasia rotunda there. They're pointing at them with less than 1/10 of a meter degree inaccuracy. In other words, they not only knew where Jerusalem was in the 11th century, the 1000s, but they knew spherical trigonometry enough to make their alignments accurate over, 3,000 miles. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And then through time, they began to build on that basic idea. Have you ever heard of the Spear of Destiny?
Oh, yeah.
The Spear of St. Longinus?
Yep.
Well, this was the first really major home for the Spear of Destiny. Charles IV, who was the Luxembourg emperor, acquired it when he became the Holy Roman Emperor. And he built a church in the middle of the new town to hold the Spear of Destiny and other relics. And he also decided while he was at it, he would convert his new town that he was building into an exact replica of Jerusalem.
Okay.
And to this day, the streets around Charles Square are in the same alignment and in the same place as the streets in that area of Jerusalem around the Temple Mount and so forth. And the church where he had the Spear of Destiny, the Spear of Longinus, is in the exact spot in this new map as the Dome of the Rock and the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And in its exact relationship is one of these rotundas lined up on Jerusalem, dedicated to St. Longinus, and it is in the exact spot in relation to the temple that the Mount of Golgotha is in Jerusalem. So this whole new city that Charles IV laid out is a model of Jerusalem, meant to be the new Jerusalem from St. John's Revelation.
All right.
And the Luxembourgs were very interesting people. The Merovingians, etc., they have their origin story about Merovee and Clovis and all that.
Yep.
About coming from this Quinotar or, this creature.
Right.
Well, the
just,
Luxembourg...
just in case nobody knows what the Spear of Destiny is, there's moviegoers out there It was featured in the movie Constantine with Keanu Reeves.
Oh, yes.
I'm sure
Great movie.
They may or may not have done it justice. I don't know, but he's using alchemical symbols on his arms and.
Well, actually, Constantine is a pretty good movie, but
it's one of my favorites. But
they sort of expanded the concept a little bit.
Yeah.
The spear of destiny is supposedly the spear that the Roman centurion Longinus plunged into Jesus' side to determine if he was alive or dead.
Exactly. Yep.
And he was obviously still alive because he bled and had water coming from his lungs. That means he's alive. So the living blood, etc., charged the spear. Now, the spear had a really long, strange history. St. Maurice, Constantine, Charlemagne, and it ended up in the royal crown jewels of the Holy Roman Empire. And today it's in the Hofburg in Vienna, but it spent maybe 100 years or so here in Prague.
Okay.
And the angel of Revelation on the lower tier of the clock next to the calendar wheel used to hold a replica of the Spear of Destiny that pointed out the day on the wheel. And that's one of the changes that the fellow who didn't survive very long afterwards made, was he changed that marker from the spear to another point.
He took the spear out of his hands?
No, the spear is still in St. Michael's hands, but it's no longer the marker for the day.
Oh, you're dead in a doornail after that.
Well, he is. Yeah, within a year, he's gone.
Yeah.
So there is this really interesting connection at that level between what the Luxembourg dynasty, which again, let me circle back to that. They're also one of these miraculous dynasties because they were founded by the union of John of Luxembourg and a water sprite by the name of Melusine.
A water sprite.
Mm-hmm. A water nymph or sprite.
Okay.
So the Luxembourg name means mountain of light. Okay.
Okay.
So when they inherited the Holy Roman Empire and moved to Prague, the castle up at the top here became the literal mountain of light. The front of the cathedral was gilded, and at sunrise it looked like there was this huge spire and mountain of gold, glowing, from the top of the castle. And Charles IV is the one who built the bridge, the first really solid stone bridge across the Vltava, connecting east and west, rebuilt the city in the model of Jerusalem, et cetera, et cetera. Really great guy, but like all dynasties, it suffered from the problem of you can never really trust what your kids are going to do. And his son, Wenceslaus IV, who is one of my favorite ghosts in Prague, totally screwed everything up and destroyed the dynasty.
Okay.
Now, the reason why he's one of my favorite ghosts in Prague is that there's a tavern up the street called At the King of Brabant, in which he has his own chair, his own niche. And we go up there a lot when I do my esoteric tour of Prague. And, I always try to get somebody to sit in the chair to see how long they'll sit there. And no one has yet made it more than about 5 minutes sitting in King Wenceslaus IV's chair.
Really?
Really. Weird things will happen. They'll spill some wine. They'll feel cold or they'll feel hot, but nobody will sit in it.
Do they get nervous?
I want to go there.
Yeah, I want to test Tom in that chair.
Well, come on, man. It's a great little
Have
restaurant.
you had, skeptics sit in the chair?
Oh, yeah.
I don't believe. What are you talking about? I'm a man. I'll sit in the chair. Bring it on, bad boy.
I don't tell people ahead of time whose chair they're going to sit in. I just say, And then afterwards we talk about it. And we've sat there with the whole group going, I don't believe what just happened. Looking at the chair and talking to, King Wenceslaus IV as if he's still sitting there, which he probably is.
Yeah.
Okay. Tom, I got a chair for you to sit in.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'll try.
He's crazy. He'll try anything. Just don't tell him. We'll take Tom there 7 nights of the week, and then have him sit in different chairs every night.
Mm-hmm.
We'll tell him which one's the one. And
yeah.
We'll pick a night, and see what happens. See how long he can sit in the chair.
Well, it's a wonderful little place. It's exactly the same as it was circa 1580, 1590. I mean, exactly. Even down to the chairs and the fact that it has straw on the floor, and the fact that, you know, they've got 600 years worth of crud on the walls.
Oh my God, that must be amazing. The atmosphere.
It's like, it's like, okay, you go to this place not for the food or the drink, but just simply to sit there and soak in the vibe.
Yeah, a good place to write too, I would think.
Well, it's a little noisy, and I actually get
okay.
distracted by St. Wenceslas, you know.
Oh yeah, does he have chats with you while you're there?
Things, let me just put it this way. In that alcove, things move around on the table without anybody being anywhere near them.
You seen that?
I've seen that. I've actually seen a glass of wine fly off the table and dump itself in somebody's lap.
Okay, that would be cool.
Yeah.
I mean, we're old ghost hunters from way back. Me and Tom used to go and check out haunted houses, and we'd take psychics and all kinds of stuff.
Well, just come on. This is Ghost City, and you know, I can show you at least half a dozen haunted houses within a block of here. So,
is there any old pyramids still that haven't been explored too much anywhere?
You mean the earthwork sort of
the mounds?
pyramids?
Yeah, there are mounds here.
Well, there are no pyramids, but there are a large number of very, very old mounds, and a truly amazing number of standing stones, menhirs, chambers, dolmens, and that sort of thing. You never hear about megalithic Czech Republic, but they're here. I mean, it's truly amazing what's just sitting around that nobody knows about.
Hey, there's a book for you.
Yeah.
Well, it's an article at least, but
Megalithic Czech Republic.
Oh yeah, and some of these sites are just amazing, just truly amazing, and all sorts of legends. You know, again, it's like during the gray years of the socialist communist era, all this stuff couldn't be talked about, right? But the legends have still survived. The people who live on the spots heard it from their grandfather, and he heard it from his grandfather. So these stories are still there. They've just gone under the radar because of 40 years of communism.
Right. But I just want to catch up on something you said earlier. That spear is still, it's in a museum somewhere?
Oh, yeah. It's in the Hofburg Museum in Vienna.
Okay.
Hitler had an encounter with it in 1908, and it's the reason why he absorbed Austria. And one of the first things he did on his triumphal entry to Austria was to go to the Hofburg and collect the spear and the regalia.
Okay.
And they were hidden in a salt mine outside of Salzburg at the end of World War II. They were personally recovered, including the spear, by George Patton.
Okay.
In fact, Patton actually had his hands on the spear outside of the case about a month or so before he was run over by a lorry.
I was just going to ask you, was that a good thing or a bad thing? So apparently it's a bad thing.
You'd have to ask George S. Patton, but I'm sure he got a thrill out of it anyway. And then it came back to the States and spent some time in Washington, where a House committee co-chaired by Richard Nixon repatriated it to Austria in something like 1948, 49, something like that.
Okay.
And what kind of powers is it supposed to have, or magical powers?
Apparently it killed Patton. So.
Besides killing Patton.
Well, he who rules the spear rules the world.
Okay. Didn't work out for Patton, though.
Well, and it didn't work out for Hitler either, but he sure gave it a good go.
Now, does that have something to do with your intention?
Yeah, it does. It definitely does.
I mean, if your intentions are evil,
yeah,
it might work in reverse for you. It might,
Well, yeah. Well, the other entertaining legend is about the Czech crown jewels.
Okay. Well,
you know about the SS and the Occult Bureau and et cetera.
Yeah, okay. That's Heimlich Himmler and how they were all interested in the occult and...
Yeah. And Himmler's second in command, Reinhard Heydrich,
Yep.
was like the big spook hunter, relic hunter of the whole gang.
Okay.
And he was the Nazi governor or controlling power in the Czech Republic. And he was here to look for all the Bohemian treasures. And also, according to some of my sources, again, legend, to look for the golem.
Right.
And he had the audacity one day to put the crown of St. Wenceslaus on his head, and less than a week later, British intelligence had gunned him down.
Okay. So that's a bad thing, too.
Oh, yes. Putting on the crown of St. Wenceslaus, if you're not energetically ready for it, brings on death. There are other stories of that, but Heydrich is the most prominent example.
That seems to be prevalent in stories of that bent of powerful objects. That if you're not sort of prepared, if you haven't put your time into your own personal growth, then it can have bad effects.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, Rudolph II had his own personal collection of holy grails. He spent thousands of guilders buying anything that anybody had that was ancient and that claimed to be the Grail Cup.
Right. And I'm sure there's thousands of people that would sell them the Grail Cup.
Yeah. But he did have a really interesting collection. One of his most prized Grail Cups is now at a place in Mount Zion, Switzerland. And that in itself is pretty bizarre, but...
Okay.
So, I mean, you have to kind of think about the time period we're talking about, the time period when Edward Kelly was sort of like the alchemical superstar of Prague. This is close to our modern world, but it's almost like an inverted version of our modern world. In other words, politics were very modern and religion very not modern. You know, science, alchemy, and so forth, Hermeticism, modern. You know, the flip side, superstitions and magic and so forth, not very modern. Okay. And it all got mixed together around the personality of Rudolph. And Rudolph is almost an example of the schizophrenia of the time period. He was raised by his uncle Philip, who was a really nasty Catholic, liked to burn people at the stake after Mass on Sunday. Ooh. And was also influenced by his other uncle, Ferdinand of the Tyrol, who was an alchemist, was probably one of the most incredible Hermetic scholars, you know, of the time period. So he was like caught between these two contrasting poles and managed to kind of keep the balance for 37 years and create this open space in which all the freethinkers of Europe, you know, glommed onto Prague. They all showed up here in Prague.
Right.
And that's the core of the whole Hermetic Revolution. That's the core of the Rosicrucianism. And it's really the core of our modern world, science and so forth.
Right. And so, and the Freemasons as well.
The Freemasons were big here during the latter part of the 18th century.
Okay.
They were officially banned by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but that just made them, you know, change their name to the Saturday Afternoon Reading Club and stuff. And there's right around the corner from here is one of the major Masonic Napoleonist revolutionary hangouts called the U Bonaparte.
Okay.
And it's where everybody got together, you know, at the turn of the 18th, 19th century, you know, to drink their cognac and praise Napoleon and down with the Austrian, you know. And it still has a very nice vibe.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that's usually, you know, the whole thing with revolutions. The revolutions start with a small amount of people gathering with similar ideas and usually wanting to overthrow some sort of governmental body.
Yeah. Well, if there's one thing the Czech people know, it's revolution and the resulting oppressions. They've gone through it time after time after time for the last 400 years.
Yeah. One of the problems with that I just made a comment about this last week, was one of the problems with that is you see the revolutions happen, and then the people who were filled with all of these gonna free the people, gonna do everything for the people. Well, when the revolution's over and they overthrow the dictator, then they get voted in and put into office, and a couple years later, they are now the dictator. They're giving nothing to the people, putting everything in their pocket, and that vicious cycle starts all over again. Power corrupts.
Yeah, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. I will put in a good word for the Czech Republic post-Velvet Revolution.
Okay.
Of all the revolutions, the one here in 89 was peaceful and deeply transformative, and actually resulted in that rarity, which is a fairly open and tolerant democratic society in which nobody particularly grabbed power.
Right.
So there was, and that's due, that's due mostly to the first president, Václav Havel, who is a real gentleman and a real intellectual, and understood how revolutions go. I mean, he's a scholar, so.
Yeah.
So
he
it is
that they could go bad quickly.
Oh yeah. Well, they had seen that happen a few times, and So last year was the 20th anniversary of the reformation of the Prague City Police.
Okay.
So the police gave a big party on Old Town Square, and their banner was a newer, kinder police force.
Oh my! Now, do you think they mean it? They mean it, right?
Oh, they mean it. They absolutely mean it.
They mean it.
They're very polite. They're very open. They don't mind drunks and etc. But when you do screw up, they're all over you really quick and hard. So robbery, vandalism, that sort of thing. Boy, they stamp it out instantly.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's impinging on another person's rights. I mean.
Yeah, but otherwise, if you want to get a little loud and rowdy and sing soccer songs in the street, no problem. So they are kinder, friendlier. They truly are.
Well, that's great. That's great.
Vincent, the knowledge that they had when we were talking about the tower and the clock, that type of knowledge, where do you think that came from, or is there any legend behind it?
Okay, where it came from is, this is a continuation of the Brotherhood of the Circle story that I stopped with Charles IV. This group around Charles IV, and that would be in the 14th century, they're the ones who, like I said, built the Gothic framework for the clock. And there are just so many amazing Hermetic alchemical images on the Gothic stonework of the clock. It's just like, you could write a whole book about that. But someone in that group, and again, we're not quite sure, had a Greek copy of the complete works of Ptolemy, some of which we don't have anymore. We don't have Ptolemy's fourth book on celestial dynamics, but someone in this group in Prague 600 years ago had it, and they used a pseudo-Ptolemaic view. In other words, the Earth is the center; it's geocentric, and Prague is the center of the Earth. That's where all the clock points come together as Prague. But they used the apparently quite common Greek idea in the 2nd century that the Earth was a spherical thing; it was round, and how to do a polar projection. Now, again, we've lost that fourth book of Ptolemy, so we really can't check on whether that's exactly where it came from.
Okay.
But the theory is that someone in that circle around Charles IV in the late 1300s, early 1400s, had access to that information and was a good enough mechanic to actually make the gears and levers and everything to make it run.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. So if we're going back into the prehistory, like where do you think, God, it's even hard to say an original source because how far back do you want to go in human history, right?
Yeah.
But how far back have you taken it?
The clock or
no,
Prague,
just the knowledge, the alchemical and magical knowledge. I mean, how far back can we go?
Well, alchemy is the most modern of all occult arts. In other words, we can't trace alchemy any further back than the 1st century BC AD in Alexandria.
All right.
Components of it are found in Egyptian sacred science, but it was first the Greek, Egyptian, Hebraic scholars of Alexandria who turned it into a science.
Right.
So it's much more recent than, theurgy or talking to spirits or riding up to God in a fiery chariot. That's very, very ancient. But alchemy, the actual work with metals, is much more modern.
Okay.
But when you look at the Smith legends, the people who metalwork, going back into the Neolithic cultures and so forth, like the megaliths I'm talking about.
Okay.
There is a real alchemical component to all of the smithy stories. In other words, the magical smith is always the guy who finds the meteoritic stone and turns it into Excalibur or
Excalibur, yeah, exactly. Exactly. Funny, I just seen a new show that came out that had that exact scene in it. I found this that fell from the sky, and it's the only ingot of its kind, and I'm going to make a special sword for the king, Arthur, and he makes Excalibur. And, yeah.
Well, that same legend is everywhere. There's one here of the same way of someone turning a miraculous stone that fell from the sky into a miraculous sword, etc. So it's like, okay, that kind of connection with higher energies, etc., comes together in this idea of the smith or the metalworker. And in this part of the world, back 3000 BC or so, they were already beginning to do some pretty astounding metalwork.
Right.
The very early Celtic people made incredible bronze, brass, iron swords, and they even had a form of steel.
Oh, okay.
Which that would have been their super sword because it could slice right through, a bronze sword or whatever.
Yeah.
So the whole tradition about metalworking is just absolutely fascinating. And then you add to it the local Venetian glassmakers that worked here and how they were able to get the red stained glass. And there's a whole nother piece of the puzzle, the whole mercury sulfide infusion with gold that turns stained glass that lovely rich red color.
Okay.
There's a street right below where I'm living called the Italian Street. And it was the street where all the Italian glassmakers lived, which is handy because if you have an alchemical laboratory in the basement and you need more glassware, you just send the servant 2 blocks down the street.
Yeah.
And they can pick it up for you.
And they were glass workers and glass blowers and stuff. I've got a strange question for you, but I gotta ask.
Go for it.
Is there any historical references to lights in the sky in Prague, or what we would commonly call UFOs today?
Okay, Prague, not so much.
Okay.
But there are enormous numbers of lights in the sky stories about some of these megalithic areas.
All right.
There's an old volcano cone when the meteor hit the region 160 million years ago. It created all these fractures and it threw up the mountains around the rim. And sort of a little bit off from the rim, throw up, was a volcanic flue. And that volcanic flue is now what they call a Jeep Mountain.
Okay.
And it looks artificial, and it is sort of. It's been shaped, but it's actually a piece of volcanic basalt. And it is the megalithic center. It's the Hill of the Dragon, around which all of these megalithic communities were aligned. In other words, each of the little megalithic communities had a standing stone that pointed to Jeep Mountain on winter or summer, solstice, sunrise, etc.
Okay.
And the story is, and I just heard one of these stories from a guy who had seen it 2 weeks ago. The story is that something takes off from the old oppidum, the old Celtic earthwork fort, and flies through the sky to Jeep Mountain. And the locals call it the Dragon. But the guy who I was talking to 2 weeks ago who had seen it says it's just a big kind of stream of light that comes up out of one place and goes off to the other.
Really?
Yeah.
So like a ball, a contained piece of light, or like a single light that goes from one area to the other?
No, it's sort of like a stream. It's not continuous, but it's like it's got a head and a tail. It looks like a dragon.
Okay.
And it only flies on the winter solstice and the summer solstice. So that's sort of like some sort of, energy telluric anomaly.
Okay.
But there's another area, not too far away from where we're talking about, that has over 1,000 standing stones lined up like at Karnak in this sort of grid array.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the spot for seeing UFOs in Central Europe.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, there have been, probably 100 or more good photographs and videos and stuff taken of lights hovering in the sky, dancing in the sky, flying off really quickly, from the little hilltop where there's thousands of stones in this grid array.
Another Earth. See, that seems to be a common occurrence where there's old structures or standing stones, megalithic structures. They tend to see, that seems to be hot spots and mountains as well.
Yeah, the yin and yang spots. My joke to my pilgrim friends is that, okay, and what we need to do is we need to talk to the dragon and get him to make us some crop circles.
There you go. I wonder if there are any crop circles out there.
No, there have never been any reported crop circles.
Okay.
In the Czech Republic. And I think with all the megaliths, it's just a matter of nobody's really talked to the crop circle makers.
Yeah, come over here, make some stuff.
Yeah, come on, guys. Give us something.
Yeah.
Because in England, there are all sorts of people trying to interact with them all the time, and have been for, I guess, the last 50 years or so.
Yeah. I mean, that's been it's something that's been happening quite a long time. Wow, we've gone through our time right now, but
okay.
I think we've covered pretty much everything. What's the weirdest thing you've ever seen somebody do that is of a magical nature? Like the absolute one that made you go, okay, that was freaking weird.
Well, not so much the magical people, but I have seen some shamanic types do some pretty weird thing. I saw this guy in Nepal, I guess 20 years or so ago, who really was levitating. He wasn't just hopping. He rose about 3 feet off the floor and stayed there for 20 minutes.
And what about there's the trick, the Chris Angel trick, where you have something behind you, and you slip your foot out of your sneaker, and you place it up behind you, and then you stand up, and that way people they think
it looks like you're floating. Yeah.
But did you see the one where he was down in Vegas, and he flew like about 20, 30 feet in the air?
I did, and I also seen the thing that described how he did it.
Yeah, he's definitely, it's good prestidigitation, but it's not the same. Let's just say the guy in Nepal, I was 2 feet away from him, and literally, there were people all the way around him.
Because you're a smart guy. I mean, you know enough of this stuff to go, okay, I see what he's doing and how he's doing.
When I was a teenager, I spent an enormous amount of time learning prestidigitation, magic, illusionism, because I wanted to be a magician. I didn't quite know what that meant at that point, but.
But you wanted to go the route of
I wanted to go there.
Yeah.
And the little guy in Nepal, he wasn't tricking. He was just way on up there. But in ritual and stuff, I've seen things appear and disappear. It just really... Oh, that's a longer story. I did observe once a possession of a very recently dead person in a voodoo ritual, and that's right on up there to some of the strangest things I've ever seen.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think the levitation thing would get me. I think I'd be
Yeah,
like,
the
okay,
levitation was the one that, okay, this is just, I can't even begin to comprehend.
Was your linear mind trying to figure out how he did it?
Oh, hell yeah. What do you think? I'm
Yeah.
a rationalist, man.
Yeah.
It's
So you were like looking underneath, going, okay. Was he wearing a long robe, you know?
No. He had a dhoti. He was naked except for a thing around his nuts, and that was it.
Really?
Yeah.
And there was no wire in his back?
No wire, no nothing.
Did
Like
he
I say,
move his feet up and down?
Oh yeah, he was in a very small room with about 30 people, and we were all chanting. We were all focusing the energy, and he was just floating.
Fuck yeah, that would be a life changer.
Yeah, that was like, okay, you know.
That's weird. I'd love to see that sort of thing.
Well, apparently, even for those guys, it's really rare to have that kind of
a show
juice. Yeah, and again, they're not doing it for show. The guys that are down in the marketplace doing the rope trick and so forth. Yeah, we know how they do that. But this guy was just in the middle of his spiritual practice, and he had a really good group, and he was flying literally.
Wow, that's cool, man.
Cool.
That's cool.
Well, guys, I need to sign off and run up the hill if I'm going to have some supper.
Oh, go have some supper. I'll talk to you later. Hang up on us.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Take care,
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.